Hello and welcome to episode 76 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
And our special guest is Naoufal Kadhom, and we've had him on the show about a year ago, and we're welcoming him back to the show. So welcome back, Naoufal.
Thanks, Nader. Hi, everyone.
So the topic for this show today is going to be basically payment processing. Naoufal has created a pretty nice payment library that's specifically for React Native. We're going to kind of talk about that. We're also going to kind of talk about how it's implemented, but also what other options are out there. And then if you just basically want to take payments in React Native, like what are the concerns and what are the options? So Naoufal, since you've already, I guess, been on the show and you've given an intro, I think, about how you got into programming, can you kind of just give us maybe a more up-to-date intro, like what you're doing right now, where you're working, and then we can get into the topic after that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Montreal, and I moved to the Bay Area about maybe 8 to 9 months ago to join Netflix, where I work as a senior UI engineer. There, I spent a lot of my time working on payments across platforms, so on iOS, Android, TV, and web. And so prior to that, I was doing a lot of open source work for React Native, and I sort of naturally fell into this library because I was solving payment problems at work, and I was doing a lot of React Native work. And so when I put the two together, that's sort of how I came up with React Native payments.
So to be clear, you're not doing this exact React Native work at Netflix. You're doing more just like native and web, and then you kind of took that and you made it React Native, or you're actually using React Native at Netflix?
Yeah, no. So we were experimenting with React Native a little bit over the past year. We haven't done anything payment related at the moment, but I was working on another project another project using the payment request API, which is a new it's a new payment API for the web. And so as I was working on this project, I started thinking back at a module that I started for a different one called React Native Apple Pay. It was just this wrapper around the Apple Pay API. And I was never really happy with the API that I came up with, and I wasn't ready to release it. It was in beta, incomplete in beta for over a year. And so when I started working on this payment request API project for the web, I started seeing a lot of similarities between the payment request API for the web and what I had done with Apple Pay. And so I wondered if I could apply that API as an interface to interact with Apple Pay, and that's sort of how I came up with it. So
the React Native, I guess, is the React Native module, is it like a wrapper around the payment request API?
Yeah, so it's essentially a polyfill for the payment request API, the exact same API that you would use on the web, or that's slowly getting released across different browsers. So it allows you to use that exact same API to use Apple Pay. So to then charge your customers with Apple Pay, present the Apple Pay dialog, present shipping options, shipping methods, and update them on the fly. So this is like a new web API that's kind of being delivered across all the different browsers right now? Yeah, that's right. So this, I think they started working on payment request API maybe a few years ago. I'm not sure exactly when, but it rolled out in Chrome for Android on, I think, version 39. And shortly after that, Edge integrated it. And it's actually coming out, to Chrome 61, which, if it's not out yet, it should be coming out within the next week or so. And I know Firefox is on board too. They just released I think it was a screenshot of what it's going to look like. And the latest version of, I think, the Safari developer build, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, or it might be the nightly version. There's actually an experimental flag to turn it on there. So yeah, I'd say by the end of the year, maybe early next year, it should be in all the major modern browsers.
So what was the reason for the payment request API? Were they just trying to create a really nice, consistent way for people to be able to accept payments over the web, whereas there wasn't one before?
Yeah, so there's actually a great talk by Zach Koch, I think the last name is pronounced. He's a project manager at Google on Google Chrome. And the way he put it was, we should look at payment requests as kind of like the next version of autofill, right? So what it's doing is it's essentially taking the credit cards that you already have saved in your browsers. So the ones that you would use if you're going through a checkout form, and then you kind of hit autofill, and then it would fill out all the inputs with your credit card data. So it's taking those same credit cards, but instead of filling a form, developers can request that data in a beautiful object, right? And so what the user sees is like a nice payment sheet that comes up that summarizes the items that you're going to be charged for in the total amount. And then beneath that, you can select one of the credit cards that you have saved in your browser. And when you hit the pay button, it's actually only taking it's taking that saved card and it's sending it over to the developer all via JavaScript. At which point the developer can make an API call to their backend, charge the customer, and then
nice.
That's their error message.
That makes so much sense now. And I guess with what you've done with React Native, have you integrated any of these like other backend solutions as far as like I don't know, PayPal or whatever, Stripe and those types of things? Or
so the first version that I released didn't have support for any payment processors. It would send you the payment data it would send you the Apple Pay payment data, which you would then have to charge on your own server. And a bit later, I added payment processor support for Stripe and Braintree. So today you can install these add-ons. So I created an add-on system in the CLI that allows you to easily link these native dependencies. And really what they are is just like a wrapper around Carthage. So it'll download the library, and then you can use the React Native Payments CLI to then link these frameworks to your project, at which point you'll be able to create Apple Pay tokens with Stripe and Braintree.
that is super cool. And I'm hogging up all the questions from Peter, but I have two more, and then I'll let him get to a few. But okay, the first one is like Braintree. Like I know I've heard of Braintree. I've never actually used it, so I'd like to know more about like what Braintree is. And then the second one I forgot.
Right,
But if I remember, I'll come back.
Cool. Yeah. So Braintree is essentially like Stripe, right? They're a payment processor, and what they'll do is actually it's probably worth taking a step back. So the way that Apple Pay works is it does payment tokenization. And so what that means is the developer never has access to your credit card information or to a user's credit card information. And so to make that work, you actually need to have a specific like Apple merchant certificate on your server that you can use to then decrypt the Apple Pay token. And so that adds a bit of overhead for developers. They have to spin up their own server and set up this decrypting mechanism. And so rather than spinning that up on your own, you can use a service like Stripe or Braintree. And so their payment processors, they'll process payments for you. But in the Apple Pay case, they'll also enable you to run a transaction using a Apple Pay payment token.
So do you have to use Apple Pay, or can you interact with like Braintree and Stripe directly?
With React Native Payments?
Yeah.
Yeah, so React Native Payments is just an interface for Apple Pay and soon Android Pay. And the objective is really to emulate the payment request API, which is a way to charge customers with their saved cards, right? And so outside of these two mobile wallets, as far as I know, there is no way to save a credit card to a device, like to your iPhone or to your Android phone. And so the objective with React Native Payments is simply to provide developers with a way to bill customers without presenting a checkout form.
Nice, just to make the checkout process smoother and all that.
So does like stuff like the shipping information, is that coming from like the developer server then?
Shipping information as in what the user is going to select, or
totally, like like your shipping address and your credit card, right? Like, are those things coming are those like saved? Well, the credit card is coming from the developer, but what about like shipping address, for example? Is that saved on the developer's end too?
So when you pop up the Apple Pay dialog, you can select as a user, you can select one of your credit cards. You can also select a shipping address if the developer requests it. And then that shipping address, as soon as you select it, even before you accept to pay, there's actually an event that sends a part of that shipping address over to the developer. So I think it'll give the developer the zip code and maybe I think country, zip, and maybe city and state. And with that information, the developer can make an API call to update the shipping method. So say you only ship locally in the US, and then you presented this dialogue. I selected my say Canadian address. Then you can block out like international shipping or shipping altogether. But all this information again comes from Apple Pay, and then once you accept to make the payment, the developer can send that over to the server. They can send it over to Stripe if they need to. So yeah.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I've personally, I never really did too much work with just Apple Pay and React Native. So just like understanding how it works is super helpful.
Yeah. So I actually have a few GIFs that I put like in the documentation to help kind of clarify the functionality. And so if you're ever interested, if you head over to React Native Payments, kind of the repo, the first GIF should have kind of an example that encompasses all of these, like shipping method, shipping information, as well as credit cards.
Oh yeah, that looks really nice. I'm checking it out now. That actually conveys a lot. It's hard to kind of convey that into just kind of describing it, but that looks really cool.
Yeah. So if you look at the example, like once the shipping address is changed, look at the bottom, like under movie ticket, shipping is at 0, and then once a different shipping method is selected, it'll update the total and the subtotal.
So what are you using for that view that kind of pops up? Is that like a native thing that you're kind of using, or is that something you actually wrote as far as the animations and like it looks like a little bit of navigation or something is going on there?
Right. So I actually get all that for free by just tapping into to Apple Pay. So that dialogue is built into
nice.
Apple. Yeah, it's just a method call. And then you get all those animations for free, which is really cool. You get the data for free. You get the credit card selection, address selection too. If the user didn't have a shipping address, then you would get an input there. They could also select from their address book. So that's
wow,
pretty straightforward. I'd say it's like the code. I'd say the bulk of the code in this project is probably the payment request polyfill. The rest of it is just kind of a few methods, a show, hide, and a callback handler for when you accept to make the payment or cancel out.
So this, I guess, brings like a broader question, at least for me in my head, about like where payments are headed in the future as far as mobile. Do you feel like that Apple Pay and Google Pay, like that's pretty much going to be the standard that like everyone's going to go with? It just seems like a much better user experience, but I'm kind of curious, is this kind of like where all payments are headed?
I mean, I think so. There's a stat that shows that like as mobile, especially on the web, like as mobile traffic increases, conversion doesn't follow it, right? Because filling out a form on your phone is just like tedious, right? And there's a lot of drop off. And so on the native side, Apple Pay and Android Pay are like great solutions for this. But on the web, we never really had that, right? On the web, it was always like the autofill. Autofill was as close as we got. And so with something like payment requests on the web, it's kind of like bringing that experience to parity between mobile and web. And I think it's going to help both of these really take off. And when I say both of these, I mean web payments and mobile wallets.
I think the only drawback to using Apple Pay is that Apple takes like 33%, right?
It can't be that high, can it?
So with Apple Pay, they actually don't. You're thinking of in-app payments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so in-app payments are they're a little different. It's like that dialogue that you get that says, "Do you want to?" Like I forget exactly what it looks like, but it almost looks like an alert that'll say, this addictive gaming app wants to charge you $2 for an extra life, right, or something like that. So And the way they separate the two payment methods, so Apple Pay versus in-app payments, is if you're selling a digital good from within your app, then you need to pay them that 30% fee, right? Which is the same fee as when you're selling your app. I'm pretty sure it's 30. It could be 33. But for Apple Pay, you're actually restricted to what you can use Apple Pay for. And so for Apple Pay, it's any physical good or service. And so service would be something like Uber, right? They're not selling you software. They're selling you an offline service. Same with Airbnb. Or if you're buying, a T-shirt from an app or any merchandise, so like an app like Lululemon or Best Buy could use Apple Pay. But if you think of something like Netflix, where it's a subscription based on a digital good, right? Just showing you, selling you a movie subscription, then Netflix can't use something like Apple Pay.
Oh, gotcha. Then Apple Pay will for sure take over the world. And, like Android Pay as well, just because there are no extra fees and the experience is fantastic, right? Like why wouldn't somebody want to do it?
Yeah, exactly. I think at this point it's more a question of getting your card supported, right? Like not all cards are supported by Apple Pay. I don't think they're everywhere in the world either. Like I think they started off in the US, but it took them like a year or two to get into Canada.
Oh wow.
So I imagine that like cutting these deals with the banks isn't that straightforward as we probably think they are, and that's probably what's taking them a bit longer.
I'm sure they're arguing over just percentages.
Yeah.
Are there any other categories you can add besides card, shipping, and method? Is there anything else like a developer can add to this experience?
Yeah. So shipping is sort of if you're requesting everything, I think they just call it shipping contact. So you can request a user's name. So there's an options argument where you can request pair name true, right? If you set it to true, then it'll request a first and last name, I think. Another option is phone number, email, and the third one is shipping address.
Oh, wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, so you could sell a user, I guess with Uber, right? Like they don't need your phone name or email. They just need you to pay. Let's say you only needed the phone number for some, say you only needed the phone number or the email or the name for some reason. You can also request that, and the interface changes too. So again, in the README, if you jump to requesting contact information, I have screenshots for each one of these options and what they end up looking at, what they end up looking like. And so if you request a contact name, then the label on the left is just contact. If you request, it'll say contact, but then on the right, it'll say contact name required. And then if it's just phone number, it'll say phone number required. And if it's all three, I think it might just say contact required. I'm not sure.
So
awesome.
What got you interested in this stuff?
Stuff being payments in general?
Or? Well, I guess you mentioned you were kind of already working on the payment stuff within Netflix, but I guess in general, like the React Native stuff and open source in general.
Yeah, so I've always, I think it dates back to maybe probably 7 years ago, or I guess when the original iPhone came out. So that's 10 years ago, I guess. I was really excited by it, and I was sort of trying to get into the mobile game at first. Actually, that must have been the second year because the first year was all web apps. And I sort of had to decide at one point if I wanted to keep on, if I wanted to kind of grow into JavaScript or Objective-C at the time. And I think it was difficult for me to just kind of pick Objective-C because it seemed like it was, at the time it seemed limited to two platforms, Mac OS or iOS. And although I really like, mobile apps and mobile phones, JavaScript just seemed like a safer bet. I like that I could push code that would reach, any device that could run on any browser. And so when React Native came out, that was a really exciting moment for me because I felt like I could use my JavaScript chops and like the skills I had refined over all these years to finally build mobile apps. And I was really interested in how like the bridge worked and how you could really, kept hearing that like it's not phone gap. You're using JavaScript to really control native modules. And so one of the first things that I did was read the docs, and then I came across like the native modules API and how you could expose native components and native functionality, native APIs. And so I just figured like the best way to to learn how React Native worked under the hood was to just start bridging things. And so I think the first thing I bridged was maybe an activity view, kind of like that share sheet. And then it seemed pretty straightforward. And then I tried, another one. And then the next one I did was like Touch ID or Safari View. I forget the exact order. And so I did those for fun. And I figured that they would be functionalities I would need in apps that I would build in the future. And so as I started, building apps in React Native, Safari View was like one of the first things I needed, and I got it for free because I'd already built it. The activity view, the share sheet again, was something I'd already built. And so that's sort of how I got into it. And I sort of took a break from React Native. But then as I started working on the payment request API, I sort of thought of like this unreleased library that I had, React Native Apple Pay. And I figured that it'd be a better library if it was using the payment request API. Because one of the things that I really liked with React Native was that I could use these new web APIs. I could learn a new API that I could use on React Native and also the web. So like the Fetch API, for example, I'd never used the Fetch API before React Native. I'm not sure about you guys. Did you guys ever use it before React Native?
I think I'd seen it, but I don't think I'd used it.
No, I haven't used it at all.
Right. And so like I thought it was really cool that I could learn this new like web standard, use it in React Native, but then also use it on the web. And like today, like I wouldn't use anything else to make an HTTP request. And so the way I see React Native payments and the payment request API is like a similar API, right? It's brand new. No one's really heard of it yet. Some people may have, but they haven't really used it. And I just think it's a perfect use case for Apple Pay and for Android Pay. And so now you can learn this new API that's going to serve you on the web, but it'll also serve you within React Native. So that's sort of what I was trying to do with this library.
Yeah, that's so freaking cool. I definitely see it like on the web just taking over, as soon as people start upgrading and a lot of more of these websites or e-commerce websites start picking up on it, making orders is going to be so easy for the consumer.
Yeah, man, it's going to be dangerous. Like you're actually a click away from making a purchase now, or 2 clicks rather. But yeah, we've never really had that on the web, and I think e-commerce is going to explode with this.
Do you happen to know any websites that support the web payments API already?
I mean, for it not to be available on Chrome right now, I can't imagine there's a lot of people using it, right? Unless they're doing a polyfill.
So I actually have there's a link that you can hit that's just like a demo website that I put together. And it's actually the React Native payments demo, but running in your browser. So if you want, I can send you that URL. It'll only work on Chrome for Android and Canary right now. So if you have a version of Chrome Canary installed, you can definitely check it out.
Oh, totally. We'd love to share that too. I've been using Lyft a lot lately, and they have Apple Pay, and of course there's a lot of other. But because I use Lyft so much, I end up using Apple Pay quite a bit. And it's super nice. I mean, it feels really good just to use it. I don't know. It's like fun to use. You throw your fingerprint up there,
And the other thing on the web is like these forms. Like I don't know if you guys have ever been on a website and like autocomplete just didn't work for some reason, right? Like maybe
9 out of 10 websites.
Yeah, right. And so it's just nice not to have to deal with the inputs, and like it's always felt like magic. Like there isn't documentation that tells you. Or I don't think there is. That tells you exactly how you need to name your inputs or your IDs or names on Chrome. I think it just sort of like figures it out based on the names. And so it's just nice to have like this nice clean interface. It'll be the same across every website. And yeah, I think it'll be great for conversion. I think it'll be great for users too.
So I have a question about bridging. You kind of mentioned that you started digging into the bridge to like learn more about how React Native kind of like work under the hood. Like how difficult was it for you to kind of start exposing these native features and the different native functionality, I guess you would say, for iOS and for Android? And like when you started doing that, how much, I guess, experience did you already have? And I'm kind of curious what your advice would be to people listening that kind of want to get into doing that, because even though I've been doing React Native for a couple of years, that's still probably the pain point for me at this point, other than like navigation, I guess you would say.
Yeah, sure. So I guess before React Native, in Objective-C, I had only built an Apple Watch app, and to be honest, like I didn't really know what I was doing. I just like knew enough to get it working. And in terms of Android, I hadn't done any Android at all. But Java just sort of feels like, to me, it feels like TypeScript, right? So like if you're coming from a JavaScript background where JavaScript was the first language that you learned, then Java shouldn't be too difficult, especially if you're into TypeScript or flow typing. It does, like, at times it feels a lot like just like type JavaScript, right? Except it'll kind of push you to write classes and like inherit classes that inherit other classes. And anyway, but I would say that, the IDEs are really good. Like when the first project I was bridging, I made the mistake of writing Objective-C in Vim, and it's just like, it was a terrible thing. It was a terrible idea where like I just thought it was so gross, and like there were bugs all the time. I'd miss like a closing bracket or whatever. And then the minute I switched to Xcode for the Objective-C portion, like it was great. It was like the autocomplete really helps you. Like the documentation is really great, so you can pretty much Google your way out of it at first. And on the Android, and like same goes on the Android side. I think there's definitely that hurdle before starting where it's like, I'm going to have to learn this new language. And, I'm not used to it. I don't know what I'm doing. But when it really comes down to it, you're essentially mapping, it's essentially a map from JavaScript to the native language, right? And so if you have let's call it like a show function, or a show method on your native module side, on the JS side, then you're going to export a show method on the Objective-C side. And say you're passing a string to it, the string will be the first argument on the other side. So once you've done that and you've laid out sort of your mapping from JS to Objective-C, then you can kind of determine the functionality that you want and then jump into your native language. So I'm not going to say it's easy, but I also started with like modules that were a lot simpler. And so they only had two methods. And then on the Objective-C side, like the documentation was very clear. And so I think a good way to get started would probably be to implement something that's like already available, like an alert box, right? I'm sure like most of us can Google our way out of figuring out how to display an alert like in Objective-C or Java. And so I would start with something like that just to get like your feet wet. But for the most part, like a lot of people in the community, are open to help. So if you end up going on Discord, like Reactive Flux, React Native, the React Native flow, the React Native channel, then there's usually people that are happy to help, and a lot of people have helped me too.
So where do you think Apple Payments is going to go if you had like all the free time in the world? What are some of the features that you like wish you could make, or wish the community could help you make?
Yeah, so where do I see it going? So right now I'm working on Android Pay support. I'm pretty much done. I'm just working on documentation. So I'll probably be releasing that in a few weeks. Aside from that, I'd say probably more payment processors. So I set up React Native Payments to have kind of a plugin system that I call an add-on system. And so it's pretty trivial for someone to add a payment processor to the project. So say you needed, something like Authorized Net or Global Payments or Adyen. These are all companies that do pretty much the same thing as Braintree and Stripe. And so if they're your payment processor, you know, I'd love to see people kind of contribute these into the project. I'm happy to help and kind of guide people if they have any questions. But I'd definitely like to see this grow so that someone who wants to start a new app can use Apple Pay or Android Pay regardless of the payment processor. Obviously, it's not it's not realistic to just expect myself to kind of write all these add-ons because I don't have the context nor the time. But if someone if someone needs Apple Pay or Android Pay and they have specific needs for a payment processor, I'd love to see them contribute it or reach out. I'd love to help and kind of point them in the right direction. And so and I guess something else I'd like to see maybe is I'm sort of trying to figure this out. I was flirting with the idea of creating like a UI polyfill for the payment request API. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to kind of see what it looks like in Chrome or any one of these other browsers, but it's like a UI that pops up and kind of lets you pick your payment method, address, and all that. And so I was thinking of maybe implementing that in React Native to kind of open support for other SDKs. So say you wanted to use something like PayPal or Venmo or another payment method that doesn't require you to fill out a form. I was thinking maybe creating this UI that would allow you to pick your payment method. And so, as a developer, say you wanted to add PayPal support or Venmo, for instance, you could have kind of a send money button or a purchase button. When you press that, it would open up this payment request, this React Native payment requests UI. And then under payment methods, you could say Venmo and PayPal and Apple Pay or whatever. And then when you press those, it would bridge to that SDK. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's so cool.
I guess I was going to say, other than kind of visiting the documentation, I know I saw you at the React conference or the React Native conference in Oregon. Forgot the name. Oh yeah, Chain React. And you gave a nice talk about that there. And then you're going to be in Poland soon, right? Also talking about this stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to be at React Native Europe in Poland. You're going to be there too, right?
Yeah, heck yeah. I'm looking forward to it. We need to hang out while we're there. Peter, are you going?
No, I think I'm the only one that's not.
Next year, definitely.
Or this year, we just need to get you a ticket and a plane ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was going to say, if they want to learn more about this stuff, I guess, of course, the GitHub repo would be a good place. I know your talk is on on YouTube on the Chain React Comp channel, but where else should they go to kind of learn about this, or is that really it right there?
I mean, those are probably two best places to learn about the React Native library, but I'd say the best resources are probably just like the W3C spec, and I know Google has a few good blog posts on the payment request API, right? Like I see this library as essentially being a polyfill for payment requests. And so actually, if you go to the repo and you scroll all the way to the bottom, I have a resources section. And under payment requests, I have a few like key links. I have one that's just like an introduction and a deep dive, as well as the W3C working draft. So those are definitely good resources. Like I kept going back to those as I was writing this library, and I still go back to them today. They're great resources.
Nice. Okay, cool. I guess one last thing that has to do with this subject. I guess so. You said Chrome is picking this up in a few days, or sometime soon. I guess once Chrome picks it up, do you kind of see this being pretty ubiquitous in the future across mobile, like web development as well as app development? Yeah,
like a year from now, it'll be in every major browser. Is the way I see it, because the last remaining browser was Safari, and they just added it as an experimental feature in their latest developer release. And so I just it. It's hard for me to see developers not using this, especially after reading about like the conversion numbers that Apple's released anyway for just Apple Pay, and I think that in that YouTube video that I mentioned earlier, Zach Koch's video, he talks about a few like increases in conversion, kind of like the numbers that they've seen with their early partners. So I have a hard time seeing this not take off. Like, and it's just such a better user experience. So like, if you go to the to that demo, to the React Native Payments demo on the web, and try it on an Android phone or on an Edge or Chrome Canary, it's hard to see people not want to use this over a checkout form, right? A checkout form is like the highest amount of friction that you can have on a website, and so this essentially eliminates that.
Do you ever think there's going to be like a cross-platform module that works for both the web and iOS because of where things are going?
That's sort of what I'm trying to do with React Native Payments, right? So in that example that I have, that's the exact same code that's running in my iOS demo. The only difference is the config. It's like the method data it's called, and so you can pass it like method data and payment request is an array of objects, and each object is a payment method. And so in that example, I have the web payment method, and I also have the React Native Payments Apple Pay payment method config. And so by having both of those on the web, it'll detect what's compatible. And so that would be the first one, the first basic card. It's called the basic card config. And so that's why you're able to use it on the web. And then within your React Native app, it'll pick up the second config that's passed there, which is a React Native Payments Apple Pay config. And so you get 100% code share between web and iOS at the moment. And in a few weeks, you'll be able to share that code with Android as well.
Dude, that is epic.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked the first time I got it to work. It's almost like I didn't expect it to work. And then when it did, I was like, oh, okay, this is way cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for your contributions. I mean, that's such a huge part of building like e-commerce apps and just anything, that needs purchases, and just having this there for people is just really awesome.
Thanks, man. My pleasure. If anyone out there is using it and you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. I always like to hear from people who are actually using this stuff in their applications.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll get to the picks. Peter, do you have any picks today?
Yeah. So this is a shameless plug. Now that I'm feeling better with less anxiety, I started just sort of thinking about things from an open source perspective. Like, what am I working on right now that I could open source in one way, shape, or form? And one of those things I open sourced this weekend, just like a simple module called React Native Async Storage, and it's a declarative component for React Native. So, instead of just using async storage like a function, you can build it right into your component, and then just like it takes an item key, like username, for example, and then like your normal like render function, and then you can track like the loading state, the value, and if any error comes up. Super simple to use, and it's like really great for situations where you're like loading up an app, right? Where you want to pull some stuff from async storage if you're not using like Redux persist, and do something with it before rendering the main thing. So it's been pretty convenient for me, and figured I might as well open source it.
Nice. I'm looking at it right now. This looks really good.
Yeah, it looks dope. Kind of makes me think of that talk that Ryan Florence gave. I think he had like a similar component around like the fetch API, like a declarative way to make a GPU request.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, it's so cool. Yeah, it's like just different ways to like play around and experiment. It's nothing like that like radical, just like, let's give it a shot and see what happens with it,
Yeah, I mean, it's like the router, right? Like just using components for everything. I like it. Are you using this in your app right now?
Yeah, I'm using it. I actually just like, I had it like hard coded. Well, obviously not hard coded. It wasn't its own module, and I just like switched it over right now. So it's pretty cool. I use it for like an API key,
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Naoufal, do you have any picks?
Do I have any picks? Yeah, sure. So my pick is React Native Europe, which is next week. I think September 6th and 7 or 7 and 8. It's in Poland. I'll be speaking about React Native payments. Nader, you'll be there too, speaking about
Cross-platform and beyond. I'm actually going to be going over Flutter. I'm going to be going over Weeks and a bunch of different other ways to do stuff like React Native.
Awesome. Yeah. I wonder if we're going one after the other, just like a Chain React. Nice 1-2 punch.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I know I'm like on the second day towards the end. I know that.
Yeah, me too. You should probably
okay.
schedule. But yeah, that's my pick.
All right. I have 2 picks. One of them is a book called Resilience, Hard-Won Wisdom for Living a Better Life by Eric Greitens. And I've been in like a book drought. I've probably read about 6 books in a row that I've just been completely just not happy with, which is unusual because I usually am pretty picky about what books I end up investing my time reading. And I finally found a really good book. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time already. I'm only about halfway done with it. But again, it's called Resilience, Hard-Won Wisdom for Living a Better Life. It's like this guy, he's writing these letters to like his friend that came back from war. And he's kind of just giving him advice. But in reality, it's more like it's a lot of philosophy and a lot of like just good just knowledge, I guess you would say. And the way he wrote the book is really, really cool. I would definitely recommend checking that out. My other pick is Flutter. I've been playing around with a bunch of things lately, like similar to React Native. And I've never really given Dart a shot, but recently I was getting ready for my talk and started playing around with Flutter, and I kind of like it. And I really kind of like Dart. And I know that Reason is another one of these like compiled to JS languages with similar syntax. And it's cool too. And Dart, I found to be really, really easy to pick up for me at least. It reminds me a lot of TypeScript. So pretty much if you've been writing JavaScript and TypeScript, you can probably pick up Dart within really a couple of hours. And there's a lot of similarities there between just JavaScript and Dart. But there's also a lot of similarities between Flutter and React. The main differences I've noticed are like styling issues. So like I really like the way React Native does its styling. I'm not so fond of the way that Flutter does its styling. But anyway, something to take a look at if you're interested. All right, well, that wraps up this episode of React Native Radio. Naoufal, thanks again for coming on and spending the hour with us. It was a really great show. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this information.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
I got a lot out of this presentation.
Definitely. I'm ready to get built and stuff and start charging people money for it. And I'll see you next week in React Native EU, Naoufal. And for everyone listening, we'll see you next week.
See y'all.